The sound of horses thundering behind her made Faith Zimmerman dig her heels harder into the mare's flanks, her wedding dress catching the wind like a tattered white flag of surrender she refused to wave. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail between Phoenix and the small mining town of Wickenburg this July afternoon in 1878, and she could hear her father's men gaining ground with every passing second. She had made it 3 miles from the church before they spotted her. 3 miles of desperate freedom that might be all she would ever know if she could not find somewhere to hide in this endless expanse of sagebrush and red rock. The mare stumbled on loose stones, nearly throwing Faith from the saddle, and she grabbed the pommel with white-knuckled hands. Her veil had torn away miles back, and her dark hair whipped around her face in tangled waves. The elaborate dress her mother had spent months preparing weighed her down like chains. Layers of silk and lace meant to make her beautiful for a man she despised. Charles Whitmore was 47 years old, a railroad magnate with cold eyes and colder hands, and her father had sold her to him as easily as he would sell cattle. The arrangement would save her father's failing ranch and secure the Zimmerman name in Phoenix society, but it would cost Faith everything she was. She rounded a bend in the trail and saw it, a small ranch house nestled against a rocky outcrop with a barn and corral nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney despite the summer heat, and she made her decision in an instant. The mare's flanks were lathered with sweat as Faith yanked the reins and turned toward the property, praying whoever lived there had more mercy than her own father had shown her. She practically fell from the saddle in the yard, her legs shaking from the hard ride. The ranch looked well kept but modest, with a small garden patch and a few chickens scratching in the dirt. She could hear the pursuing horses growing louder, perhaps only a minute or two behind her now. Faith ran toward the house, her dress catching on a fence post and tearing with a loud rip that she barely registered. She pounded on the wooden door with both fists. "Please, someone help me, please." The door swung open to reveal a man in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his work shirt. He had strong features and eyes the color of honey, currently widening in surprise at the sight of a woman in a torn wedding dress standing on his porch. He was tall and lean with the build of someone who worked hard for a living, and there was something immediately reassuring about the way he looked at her, concerned rather than opportunistic. "They're coming," Faith gasped, grabbing his arm. "Please, I need to hide. Please do not let them take me back." The man glanced past her to the trail where dust clouds signaled the approaching riders. His jaw tightened, and he made his decision just as quickly as she had made hers. He grabbed her hand and pulled her inside, shutting the door behind them. "The barn," he said, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "You can hide in the loft. I will deal with whoever is coming." "Thank you," Faith whispered, but he was already moving, leading her out the back door and across the yard to the barn. Inside, it smelled of hay and horses, with golden afternoon light streaming through gaps in the wooden walls. A ladder led up to a loft piled high with hay bales. "Get up there and stay quiet no matter what you hear," he instructed. "Do you understand?" Faith nodded and climbed the ladder as quickly as her dress would allow, which was not very quick at all. The man, whose name she still did not know, helped push her up the last few rungs, and then began arranging hay bales to hide her from view below. She squeezed into the space he created, her heart hammering so hard she was certain the riders would hear it when they arrived. The man climbed back down and was just exiting the barn when Faith heard the horses come thundering into the yard. She pressed her face against a gap between the hay bales and could just make out the scene below through a crack in the barn wall. 5 men had arrived, all of them wearing the colors of her father's ranch hands. She recognized Tom Sullivan, her father's foreman, a grizzled man in his 50s with a mean streak. The others were younger ranch hands, good men mostly, who would follow orders without question. The stranger who had sheltered her walked calmly toward them, wiping his hands on his pants as though he had simply been interrupted during his daily work. He stopped a few yards from the riders and looked up at them with an expression of polite curiosity. "Afternoon," he said. "Something I can help you gentlemen with." Tom Sullivan spat tobacco juice on the ground near the stranger's boots. "We are looking for a woman. Runaway bride in a white dress. Would have come through here just now on a bay mare. You seen her?" The stranger crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head slowly. "Have not seen anyone all afternoon. Been working in the back pasture most of the day. Mind if we look around?" Tom did not wait for an answer before dismounting. Two of the other men followed suit. "Actually, I do mind," the stranger said, and his voice held an edge of steel that had not been there before. "This is private property, and I do not take kindly to strangers tramping through my land without permission." Tom stepped closer, trying to use his bulk to intimidate, but the stranger did not back down an inch. Faith held her breath, terrified there would be violence. "Now listen here, boy," Tom growled. "That woman is the daughter of Gerald Zimmerman, and she has promised to marry Charles Whitmore this very afternoon. Her running off like this is an embarrassment to both families, and we have orders to bring her back by any means necessary. If you are hiding her, you are making a very big mistake." "I told you I have not seen anyone," the stranger repeated, "and I am going to have to ask you to get back on your horses and leave my property. Now." Faith could see the fury building in Tom's face, the way his hand moved toward the gun at his hip. She wanted to call out, to surrender herself rather than let this kind man be hurt on her account. But she remembered his instructions to stay quiet no matter what. One of the younger ranch hands, a boy named Billy whom Faith had always liked, spoke up nervously. "Tom, maybe she went a different direction. Maybe she cut off toward Wickenburg before reaching here." Tom considered this, his hand still hovering near his weapon. The stranger had not moved, had not shown any sign of fear, and Faith realized that he must be accustomed to handling dangerous situations. There was a confidence in his stance that spoke of a man who could take care of himself. "We will check the other trails," Tom finally said, mounting his horse again. "But if I find out you are lying, boy, you will answer to Gerald Zimmerman himself, and that is not a man you want as an enemy." "I appreciate the warning," the stranger said dryly. "Good day to you." The men rode off, though Tom kept looking back over his shoulder as though he suspected the truth, but could not prove it. The stranger stood in the yard until they were completely out of sight, and then he waited several more minutes before finally walking back to the barn. Faith climbed down from the loft as he entered, hay clinging to her ruined dress and hair. She was shaking now that the immediate danger had passed, the reality of what she had done crashing over her in waves. She had run from her own wedding. She had disobeyed her father. She had involved a complete stranger in her problems and possibly put him in danger. "Are you all right?" he asked, and the genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her completely. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry for bringing this to your door. I did not know where else to go, and I could not marry him. I could not." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she could not seem to stop them. The stranger pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her, keeping a respectful distance. "You do not need to apologize," he said quietly. "No woman should be forced to marry against her will. I am Owen Rourke, by the way. This is my ranch. Faith Zimmerman," she managed between sobs, "though I suppose you already knew that. I had gathered as much. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, but it was gentle rather than mocking. You are safe here, Miss Zimmerman. They will not find you, and even if they come back, I will not let them take you. Faith looked up at him through her tears, studying this stranger who had risked his own safety for hers without hesitation. He had kind eyes and an honest face, nothing like the calculating expressions she was used to from the men in her father's social circle. She wanted to ask him why he had helped her, what he expected in return, but the words would not come. Come inside, Owen said. You must be exhausted and thirsty after that ride. We can figure out what to do next once you have had a chance to rest. He led her back to the house, which was small but clean and comfortably furnished. It was clearly the home of a bachelor, with simple wooden furniture and a lack of decorative touches, but it felt warm and welcoming in a way her father's grand house in Phoenix never had. Owen pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and gestured for her to sit, then poured her a glass of water from a pitcher. Faith drank gratefully, only realizing how parched she was when the cool water hit her throat. Owen busied himself at the stove, stoking the fire and putting a kettle on to boil. I can make some coffee, he offered, or tea if you prefer. Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. Faith wiped her eyes with his handkerchief, embarrassed by her tears. I do not usually fall apart like this. I am not usually so weak. You are not weak, Owen said firmly, turning to look at her. Running away like you did took more courage than most people have. You are terrified and exhausted, and you have every right to cry if you want to. His words opened something in her chest, a flood of emotion she had been holding back for months since her father had announced the engagement. She had tried to be strong, tried to find a way out through proper channels, tried to make her parents understand that she would rather die than marry Charles Whitmore. But her mother had been weak, cowed by years of her father's domination, and her father had been immovable. The marriage would happen, he had declared, and Faith's feelings on the matter were irrelevant. He touches me like he owns me, Faith heard herself saying, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Charles, I mean. He would visit for dinner, and he would put his hand on my waist or my shoulder, and I could feel how he thought of me as his property already, like a horse he had purchased. My father said I should be grateful, that Charles is wealthy and well-connected, that I could not do better at my age. How old are you? Owen asked, bringing 2 cups of coffee to the table and sitting down across from her. 22. Charles said I was nearly too old to be a good wife, that he was doing me a favor by agreeing to marry me. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Owen shook his head in disgust. That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. You are plenty young, and even if you were twice your age, you would still have the right to choose who you marry. That is not how my father sees it. That is not how any of them see it. Faith wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, drawing comfort from its heat. I tried to tell him I wanted to teach, that there is a school in Prescott looking for teachers, and I could support myself. But he said no respectable woman works when she could marry well instead. He said I was being selfish and childish. You should choose your own future, Owen said, and there was a passion in his voice that made her look up at him. That is what this country is supposed to be about, is it not? Freedom, the right to make your own way. If that only applies to men, then it is not worth much. Faith stared at him, shocked to hear such sentiments from a man she had just met. She had known suffragists and progressive thinkers in Phoenix, women mostly who gathered in secret to discuss politics and rights, but she had never heard a man speak so plainly about a woman's right to self-determination. You really believe that, she said softly. Of course I do. My mother chose her own path, and it made her the strongest person I ever knew. A shadow of old grief crossed his face. She died 3 years ago, but she taught me that courage means living according to your own truth, not someone else's expectations. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their coffee while the afternoon light shifted through the windows. Faith felt the tension in her shoulders beginning to ease slightly, though she knew the danger was far from over. Her father would not give up easily, and Charles Whitmore was too proud to accept being jilted at the altar. They would search for her, and when they found her, there would be consequences. "What will you do?" Owen asked, as though reading her thoughts. "They will keep looking, and your father has resources. He could make things very difficult. I know." Faith set down her cup and looked at her ruined wedding dress with something like hatred. "I have some money, jewelry I could sell. I thought I might try to reach California, maybe San Francisco. I could disappear there, start a new life where no one knows me." "That is a long journey for a woman alone," Owen said carefully. "Dangerous too." "I know that as well, but what choice do I have?" Faith met his eyes, trying to project a confidence she did not entirely feel. "I cannot go back." "I will not. Whatever happens, it has to be better than a lifetime married to that man." Owen was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with something internally. Finally, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "You could stay here," he said. "At least for a while, until things settle down. I have the space, and I could use help around the ranch. It would give you time to plan properly, to save more money for the journey west if that is truly what you want." Faith's heart leapt at the offer, but reality quickly dampened her hope. "That is incredibly kind, but it would not work. If they find me here, you would be in terrible trouble. My father is a powerful man, and Charles has connections with the railroad and the territorial government. They could ruin you." "Let me worry about that," Owen said. "Besides, they already came here and searched. Why would they come back? As far as they know, you went a different direction entirely. They might hear about a woman staying here. People talk in small communities. Then we will say you are my cousin, visiting from back east. Or we will keep you hidden when anyone comes around. There are ways to manage it, if you are willing to take the risk." Faith wanted to accept immediately, wanted to stay in this safe place with this kind man who looked at her like she was a person rather than a commodity. But the rational part of her mind warned against involving him further, against putting him in the path of her father's wrath. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know me. I am nothing to you but trouble." Owen smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and almost boyish despite his sun-weathered skin. "Maybe I like trouble. Or maybe I just believe what I said before about choosing your own future. You deserve a chance to decide what you want your life to be, and if I can help with that, then I will." There was no calculation in his eyes, no hidden agenda that Faith could detect. He was simply a good man doing what he thought was right, and she felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that might have been the beginning of trust. "All right," she said quietly. "If you are sure, I will stay for a little while, but I want to help with the work. I will not be a burden." "You will not be a burden even if you do nothing but rest," Owen assured her. "But if you want to help, I certainly will not turn it down. Ranch work is never finished, and I could use an extra pair of hands." They worked out the details over the rest of the afternoon. Owen showed her the small second bedroom that had belonged to his mother, telling Faith she could use it for as long as she needed. He found her some of his mother's old clothes to wear, simple cotton dresses more suited to ranch life than Faith's ruined wedding gown. The dress he gave her was a faded blue that had been mended several times, but it fit reasonably well and felt like freedom compared to the elaborate prison of silk and lace she had worn that morning. Faith helped Owen prepare a simple dinner of beans, bacon, and cornbread, working side by side in the small kitchen. She was not much of a cook, having been raised with servants to handle such tasks. But Owen patiently showed her what to do without making her feel foolish for not knowing. They ate at the table as the sun set outside, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and pink. "Tell me about the ranch," Faith said, eager to learn about her temporary home. "How long have you been here?" "About 5 years," Owen said. "I came out from Missouri after my father died. He and I had never gotten along well, and there was nothing holding me there after he passed. My mother had already died by then, and I wanted to start fresh somewhere new. I saved everything I could and bought this land. It is not much, only about 100 acres, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who had built something with his own hands. Faith found herself envious of that feeling, having never been allowed to build anything for herself. "What do you raise?" she asked. "Mostly cattle, though I keep a few horses as well. I sell the cattle to the miners up in Wickenburg mostly, sometimes to the army fort. It is not a fortune, but it keeps me fed and the ranch running." He paused, then added, "It can be lonely sometimes, though. I have not had much company since my mother died." Faith heard the vulnerability in that admission, the way he tried to pass it off as casual when it clearly was not. She understood loneliness, had felt it acutely in her father's house surrounded by people who did not truly see her. "I imagine it must be difficult," she said softly. "Running everything by yourself. It has its challenges, but I prefer it to working for someone else, taking orders from men who do not have any more sense than I do just because they have more money." He glanced at her apologetically. "No offense intended toward your family. None taken. You are right about my father. He thinks his wealth makes him wiser than everyone else, but mostly it just makes him cruel." Faith was surprised by her own honesty, but something about Owen made it easy to speak the truth. "He was not always like that. Or maybe he was, and I was too young to see it. But after my brother died, he got worse. You had a brother, Daniel. He died of fever 4 years ago. He was supposed to take over the ranch, carry on the family name, all of that. When he died, I think something broke in my father. He started making wild investments, trying to expand the ranch beyond what it could support. That is how he ended up in debt, how he ended up needing Charles Whitmore's money. So he decided to sell you instead." Owen's voice was hard with disapproval. "That is one way to put it. He calls it a good match, a beneficial arrangement for both families. But yes, essentially he sold me." Faith pushed her plate away, her appetite gone. "I think he blames me sometimes for not being Daniel, for surviving when Daniel did not. That is not your fault." Owen reached across the table and touched her hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that sent an unexpected jolt through Faith's system. "Your brother's death was not your fault, and your father's cruelty is not your responsibility." Faith nodded, not trusting her voice. They cleaned up from dinner in companionable silence, and then Owen showed her how to bar the doors and windows for the night. He gave her a small pistol and taught her how to load and fire it, just in case, though he assured her he did not think anyone would come in the night. "I sleep light," he told her, "and I am a good shot, but it never hurts to be prepared." Faith took the pistol, surprised by how heavy it felt in her hand. She had never held a gun before, had been raised to think of weapons as ungentlemanly things that proper ladies should not concern themselves with. But she was not a proper lady anymore, was she? She was a runaway bride hiding on a stranger's ranch, and proper did not matter half as much as survival. She lay awake for a long time that night in the small bedroom that had belonged to Owen's mother. The bed was comfortable and the room was clean, but her mind would not settle. She kept thinking about her parents, wondering if they were worried or just angry. She thought about Charles Whitmore standing at the altar, his face reddening with rage as the minutes ticked by and she did not appear. She thought about the guests whispering, the scandal that would be racing through Phoenix society by now. But mostly she thought about Owen Rourke, the cowboy who had hidden her without question and told her she should choose her own future. She thought about his kind eyes and gentle hands, the way he had not looked at her with pity or lust, but simply with respect. She thought about how safe she felt in his house, safer than she had felt anywhere in years. She did not know what the future held, did not know if she would eventually make it to California or end up somewhere else entirely. But for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. The next morning, Faith woke to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. She dressed in another of Owen's mother's dresses, a practical brown cotton, and found her way to the kitchen where Owen was already making coffee. "Morning," he said with a smile. "Did you sleep all right?" "Better than I expected," Faith admitted. "What can I do to help?" Owen put her to work gathering eggs from the hen house and feeding the chickens while he tended to the horses and cattle. The work was simple but satisfying, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed everything that had happened. The morning air was already warm, promising another scorching summer day, but there was something peaceful about the routine of ranch life. They fell into an easy pattern over the next several days. Owen taught her how to milk the cow, how to mend fences, how to recognize when a horse was favoring a leg or when cattle were getting sick. Faith was a quick learner, and she threw herself into the work with determination. She wanted to prove she could pull her own weight, that she was not just a useless society girl playing at ranch life. Owen proved to be an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging without being condescending. He showed her how to handle the horses without fear, how to move around cattle without spooking them, how to shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy. In return, Faith helped with the cooking and cleaning, gradually improving her kitchen skills until she could make a decent meal without burning anything. They talked while they worked, sharing stories from their pasts. Owen told her about growing up in Missouri, about his difficult relationship with his demanding father and his close bond with his mother. He told her about coming west with nothing but a few dollars and a dream, about the hard years when he was not sure the ranch would survive. He spoke about loneliness and determination, about building something that mattered. Faith told him about her childhood in Phoenix, about her brother Daniel and how close they had been, about her mother's gradual retreat into timid silence as her father grew more domineering. She talked about the books she loved to read, the dreams she had of teaching and independence, the suffragist meetings she had attended in secret. She described the moment she realized her father truly intended to force her to marry Charles, the sick feeling in her stomach when she understood she had no choice unless she made one herself. "I had this moment of clarity," she said one afternoon as they were mending a section of fence. "I was standing in my room wearing that wedding dress, and I could see my whole life stretched out ahead of me. Decades of dinners and social events, of being touched by a man I hated, of having children and raising them to be just as trapped as I was. And I thought, I cannot do this. I would rather die than do this. So I climbed out the window, stole a horse, and ran." "That took real courage," Owen said, hammering a nail into the fence post. "Most people would have convinced themselves to accept it, told themselves it was not that bad." "I almost did," Faith admitted. "Right up until the moment I ran, part of me was thinking maybe I should just go through with it. Maybe my father was right and I was being foolish. But then I thought about what you said about choosing my own future, and I knew I had to try." Owen looked at her then, his honey-colored eyes warm with something that might have been admiration. "I am glad you did. Run, I mean." "So am I," Faith said softly, and she meant it. As the days turned into weeks, Faith found herself settling into life on the ranch in a way she had never expected. The work was hard and the hours were long, but there was a satisfaction in it that she had never found in her previous life. She learned to love the simple pleasures of a job well done, the exhausted contentment of falling into bed after a day of honest labor. She also found herself watching Owen more and more, noticing things about him that made her pulse quicken in unfamiliar ways. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy. The quiet competence of his hands as he worked. The sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. The kindness in his eyes when he thought she was not looking. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that anyone would feel warmly toward the person who had saved them from a terrible fate. But she knew it was more than that. She was attracted to him in a way she had never been attracted to anyone before, drawn to both his physical presence and his character. He was good and decent and real in a way the men she had known in Phoenix had never been. Owen seemed to be feeling something similar, though he was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. He never touched her unnecessarily, never made her feel uncomfortable, but there were moments when their eyes would meet over dinner or while they worked, and Faith would see something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Want, maybe, or longing, but tempered with respect and restraint. They were dancing around each other, Faith realized, both of them aware of the growing attraction but neither willing to acknowledge it out loud. She was still technically engaged, still hunted by her father and Charles Whitmore, still planning to leave for California eventually. It would be foolish to start something that could not have a future, but her heart did not seem to care about what was foolish or practical. Her heart only knew that she was falling for Owen Rourke, and there did not seem to be anything she could do to stop it. The situation came to a head on a hot August afternoon when they rode out to check on the cattle in the far pasture. They had been riding together more often now, with Owen teaching Faith proper horsemanship beyond her basic skills. She had proven to be a natural rider, taking to it with the same determination she brought to everything else. They found the cattle all accounted for and stopped to rest by a small creek that cut through the property. The horses drank gratefully while Owen and Faith sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, passing a canteen of water between them. "I think you are ready to start helping with the actual cattle work," Owen said. "You have gotten good enough with the horse that I trust you in the field." Faith felt a flush of pride at his words. "Really? You think I am ready?" "I do. You have worked harder than any hired hand I have ever had and you learn fast. Plus, I like having the company when I ride out." "I like it too," Faith said, and then felt bold enough to add, "I like being here with you. I like this life." Owen looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Faith, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me." "All right. Do you still plan to go to California? Because if you do, that is fine. I will help you however I can, but I need to know what you are thinking, what you want." Faith's heart started hammering in her chest. This was it, the moment they had been avoiding for weeks. She could keep pretending, keep saying she was only staying temporarily, keep holding herself back from what she really felt, or she could be honest. "I do not know what I want anymore," she said slowly. "When I first ran, California seemed like the only option. But now, being here, working on the ranch with you, I feel like maybe there could be another option. Maybe I do not have to run all the way to California to be free." "What do you mean?" Owen's voice was careful, controlled. "I mean maybe freedom is not just about distance. Maybe it is about being somewhere you can be yourself, with people who see you for who you really are." Faith took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I feel free here, Owen, with you, and I do not want to leave unless I have to." Owen closed his eyes briefly as though her words had hit him with physical force. When he opened them again, his gaze was intense, burning with barely restrained emotion. "You should know that if you stay, I am going to fall in love with you," he said, his voice rough. "I am probably halfway there already if I am being honest, but you need to understand what that means. Your father will keep looking for you. Charles Whitmore is not going to forget what happened. There could be real danger, real consequences." "I know," Faith whispered. "I am already in love with you, Owen. I have been for weeks. I just did not want to admit it because it seemed impossible, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." Owen reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hand, his thumb stroking her cheek gently. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there is no going back. I will not be able to let you go, Faith. I will fight for you, for us, against anyone who tries to take you away." "I am sure," Faith said, leaning into his touch. "I have never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as weeks of restrained longing broke free. Faith wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and hope and love into the contact. His arms came around her waist, pulling her close, and she felt safe and desired and chosen in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your courage and your determination. I love how hard you work and how much you care. I love who you are when you let yourself be free." "I love you too," Faith replied, feeling tears prick her eyes. "You saved me, Owen. Not just from that wedding, but from a life where I would never have been myself. You showed me what it means to choose your own path." They sat under the cottonwood tree for a long time, holding each other and talking about what came next. The danger had not disappeared just because they had admitted their feelings. If anything, it was more complicated now. But they were determined to find a way forward together. "We could get married," Owen suggested. "If you are legally my wife, your father and Charles would have no claim on you." "But what about an annulment? Charles might try to say I was already promised to him, that our engagement was binding." "Not if you married me first. The law is on the side of completed marriages over broken engagements." Owen squeezed her hand. "We could ride to Prescott tomorrow, find a justice of the peace. It would be done before anyone knew to stop us." Faith considered this, her practical mind working through the implications. It was fast, maybe too fast by society's standards. But society had tried to force her into one marriage already, so its standards did not hold much weight with her anymore. "Yes," she said. "Let us do it. Let us get married." They rode back to the ranch house in a state of excited nervousness, already making plans. They would leave before dawn the next morning, ride hard for Prescott, and be married by afternoon. They would spend a night in town celebrating, just the two of them, before returning to the ranch to face whatever consequences came. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in the small kitchen, Faith felt like she was floating. Every time Owen smiled at her or touched her hand in passing, her heart soared. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. Not the artificial pleasure of fancy parties and expensive things, but the genuine joy of being with someone who loved you for exactly who you were. They were just sitting down to eat when they heard the sound of horses approaching the house. Owen's expression immediately became alert, cautious. He stood and went to the window, peering out through the curtains. "3 riders," he said quietly. "I do not recognize them from before." Faith felt her stomach drop. "What should I do? Go to the bedroom and stay there? Take the pistol? If anything happens, if you hear gunshots or fighting, you get on a horse and ride for Wickenburg. Find the sheriff there, a man named Tom Bradley. He is a good man. He will help you." "Owen, please, Faith. I need to know you are safe." Faith reluctantly went to the bedroom and retrieved the pistol from where she kept it. She could hear Owen opening the front door, hear the voices of the men outside. She pressed her ear to the bedroom door, trying to make out what was being said. "Evening," she heard Owen say, his tone neutral but not welcoming. "What can I do for you?" A voice she did not recognize answered, smooth and educated. "My name is Charles Whitmore. I believe you may have some information about my fiancée, Faith Zimmerman. Her father seems to think she may have come through this area." Faith's blood ran cold. Charles himself had come. This was worse than she had imagined. "I already told the men who came before that I have not seen anyone," Owen replied, his voice steady. "I do not know what else to tell you." "Yes, I heard about that visit, but you see, I do not quite believe you." Charles's voice was pleasant, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath it. "Faith is a confused young woman who made a terrible mistake. Her father and I are willing to overlook her momentary lapse in judgment, but we need to find her quickly before she comes to harm. Like I said, I cannot help you." "Cannot or will not." Now the steel was more apparent. "Mr. Rourke, I am a reasonable man, but I am not a patient one. Faith belongs to me by right of our engagement. If you are hiding her, you are breaking the law and interfering with a legal contract." "Engagement is not a legal contract," Owen said flatly. "And even if it were, it would not give you ownership of a person. Now, I have been polite, but you are trespassing on my land. I am going to have to ask you to leave." Faith heard the sound of a gun being cocked, and her heart leapt into her throat. She could not just hide while Owen was in danger. Moving quietly, she opened the bedroom door a crack and positioned herself where she could see into the main room. Charles Whitmore was standing just inside the door, flanked by two men who were clearly hired guns rather than ranch hands. Charles himself was exactly as Faith remembered, a tall man in his late 40s with silver-streaked hair and cold gray eyes. He was well-dressed even for travel, his suit expensive and his boots polished. One of his men had drawn a gun and was pointing it casually in Owen's direction. "I do not think you understand the situation," Charles said, his voice hardening. "I have invested significant resources in this marriage, and I do not intend to lose that investment because of a girl's foolish whim. Tell me where she is, and I will make it worth your while. Refuse, and I will make you regret it." "Is that a threat?" Owen had not moved, had not shown any fear despite the gun pointed at him. "Consider it a promise. I have friends in the territorial government, Mr. Rourke. I could have you arrested for kidnapping, have this ranch seized as evidence of criminal activity. You would lose everything you have built here." "You could try," Owen said, "but that would require proof, which you do not have. And it would take time, during which I could tell some very interesting stories about a man who threatens violence to get his way." Charles's face flushed with anger, his careful composure slipping. "You do not know who you are dealing with, boy. I could destroy you." "And you do not know who you are dealing with," Owen replied, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "I am not afraid of you, Whitmore. I have faced down Apache raiders, survived drought and prairie fires, built this place from nothing with my own 2 hands. You think your money and connections scare me. You are just another bully trying to use power to get what you want." In the bedroom, Faith made a decision. She could not let Owen face this alone, could not let him take the risk for her. She stepped out into the main room, the pistol held steady in her hand, pointed at Charles. "Hello, Charles," she said, her voice calm despite the fear coursing through her. "I believe you are looking for me." Charles spun to face her, his eyes widening in surprise and then narrowing in triumph. "Faith, thank God, we have been so worried about you." "Do not lie to me," Faith said. "You were not worried. You were angry because I embarrassed you." You made a fool of me in front of everyone, Charles said, dropping the pretense of concern. Do you have any idea what that has cost me? The humiliation. I will be the laughingstock of Phoenix society. Good, Faith said simply. Maybe it will teach you that women are not property to be purchased and controlled. Charles took a step toward her, but she raised the pistol higher and he stopped. Owen had moved slightly, positioning himself where he could reach Faith if needed but keeping his attention on the two armed men. Put the gun down, Faith, Charles said, his voice taking on a cajoling tone. You are confused, overwhelmed. This man has clearly taken advantage of you, fed you lies about your family and your duties. Come with me now and we can fix this. We can still be married, still have the life we planned. We never planned anything, Faith said. You and my father planned. I was never consulted, never given a choice. And I am telling you now, clearly and plainly, that I will not marry you. Not today, not ever. You do not have a choice in this matter, Charles said, his mask of civility cracking completely. Your father has given his consent and you are still his legal responsibility. You will do as you are told. No, Faith said. I will not. And if you or your hired guns try to force me, I will shoot you. I am not a very good shot yet, but at this distance, I do not think I could miss. Owen made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough, clearly impressed by Faith's boldness. Charles looked between them, seeming to calculate his options. Finally, he turned to his men. Grab her, he ordered. I will deal with the cowboy. Everything happened very fast after that. One of the hired guns moved toward Faith while the other kept his weapon trained on Owen. But Owen was faster than they expected. He grabbed a cast iron pan from the stove and swung it hard into the nearest man's gun hand, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. At the same time, Faith pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the small room. Faith had aimed for Charles's shoulder, wanting to stop him without killing him, and her shot hit its mark. Charles cried out and staggered back, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The second hired gun, seeing his employer shot and his partner disarmed, seemed to lose his nerve. This is not worth it, he muttered, holstering his gun and raising his hands. I do not get paid enough for this. The first hired gun, nursing his injured hand, agreed. We are done here, Mr. Whitmore. Find someone else to do your dirty work. Charles was pale with shock and blood loss, slumped against the wall. Owen moved quickly to tie up the hand of the injured gunman with a kitchen towel, then retrieved the fallen weapons. You should probably see a doctor, Owen told Charles conversationally. That bullet needs to come out, and while you are getting patched up, you might want to think about leaving Faith alone, because next time she might aim for something more vital than your shoulder. You cannot do this, Charles gasped. I will have you both arrested. You will hang for this. I do not think so, Owen said. 3 armed men broke into my home and threatened me and the woman I love. This was self-defense, pure and simple. Any judge would agree, especially once they heard about you trying to force a woman into marriage against her will. He turned to the 2 hired guns. Get your employer on his horse and get out of here. If I see any of you on my property again, I will not be as generous as Faith was with her aim. The men did not need to be told twice. They helped Charles outside and onto his horse, then rode away into the gathering darkness. Faith and Owen stood in the doorway watching them go, Faith still holding the pistol though her hands were shaking now. As soon as the riders were out of sight, Faith's legs gave out. Owen caught her and held her close, taking the gun gently from her trembling fingers. You did good, he murmured into her hair. You were so brave. I shot him, Faith said, the reality of it hitting her. I actually shot a person. You protected yourself, you protected us, and you gave him exactly what he deserved. Owen pulled back to look at her face. Are you all right? I think so. I feel strange, like everything is both very real and not real at all." Faith took a shaky breath. "Do you think he will really try to have us arrested?" "He might try, but it will not work. We have witnesses that he and his men broke in here armed, and honestly, I think he is too proud to admit publicly that you shot him. Can you imagine what the society gossips would do with that story?" Despite everything, Faith felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. He would never live it down. The great Charles Whitmore, shot by the woman he tried to force into marriage. They went back inside and cleaned up the signs of the confrontation, then made sure all the doors and windows were securely locked. They decided to move up their plans, leaving for Prescott immediately rather than waiting until morning. It was risky to travel at night, but it seemed riskier to stay where Charles might send more men. They packed quickly, taking only essentials and enough supplies for the journey. Owen left feed and water for the animals, enough to last a few days, and asked a neighbor boy to look after the place while they were gone. By the time the moon rose, they were on the road to Prescott, riding side by side through the cool night. The journey took most of the night and into the next morning. They talked as they rode, processing everything that had happened and planning for their future. Faith felt the weight of the shooting pressing on her conscience, but Owen assured her she had done the right thing, that Charles would have hurt them both if given the chance. "You are stronger than you know," he told her as they watched the sun rise over the mountains. "When I first saw you on my porch in that wedding dress, terrified and desperate, I thought you needed protection. But you do not need protecting, Faith. You need someone who will stand beside you while you protect yourself." "I need you," Faith said simply. "Not to save me, but to choose this life with me, to build something together." "That is exactly what we are going to do." They reached Prescott by mid-morning, tired and dusty but determined. The territorial capital was a bustling town, full of miners, ranchers, soldiers, and government workers. They found a justice of the peace who agreed to marry them that afternoon, with 2 clerks pulled in as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and quick, nothing like the elaborate wedding Faith's parents had planned. She wore one of Owen's mother's dresses, clean but clearly well worn. Owen wore his best shirt and cleanest pants. There were no flowers, no music, no crowds of guests. But when they exchanged their vows, Faith felt more certain of anything than she ever had in her life. "I do," she said firmly when the justice asked if she took Owen as her husband. "I absolutely do." Owen's smile was radiant as he slipped a simple gold band on her finger, one he had purchased that morning from a local jeweler. "I do too," he said, "for now and forever." They signed the marriage certificate, making it official and legal. Faith was now Faith Rourke, wife of Owen Rourke, and no one could change that. Her father's consent was no longer needed, and Charles Whitmore's engagement was nullified by her marriage to another man. They stayed that night at a small hotel in Prescott, spending their first night as husband and wife in a modest room with clean sheets and a window overlooking the main street. Owen was gentle with her, patient and loving, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Faith had been nervous about the physical aspects of marriage, having heard horror stories from married women she knew, but with Owen it felt natural and right. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking quietly as the sounds of the town filtered through the window. "Do you think they will leave us alone now?" Faith asked, tracing patterns on Owen's chest. "I think so. The marriage is legal, and you made it very clear you do not want anything to do with Charles. Your father might be angry, but there is nothing he can do about it now. He will probably disown me, cut me off from the family entirely." "Would that bother you?" Owen asked carefully. Faith thought about it, examining her feelings honestly. "It should bother me more than it does, but mostly I just feel relieved. I do not have to pretend anymore, do not have to live up to impossible expectations. I can just be myself. I am glad, Owen said, kissing her forehead, because I like who you are. I like my wife. I like my husband too, Faith said, testing out the word. It felt strange but good on her tongue. They spent another day in Prescott, resting and purchasing supplies for the ranch. Faith bought some fabric to make new dresses and some books she had been wanting to read. Owen bought tools and equipment he had been needing but putting off. They walked through the town hand in hand, publicly establishing themselves as a married couple so there could be no question later. On their way back to the ranch, they stopped to send a telegram to Faith's parents. Owen had argued that they did not owe them any explanation, but Faith felt she needed to do this one last thing to close that chapter of her life properly. The message was brief and to the point. Married Owen Rourke in Prescott. I am safe and happy. Do not look for me. Faith. Faith felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she watched the telegraph operator send the message. It was done. Her old life was over and her new life was beginning. When they arrived back at the ranch, everything was as they had left it. No one had come looking for them, and the animals were all fine. They settled back into their routine, but everything felt different now. They were not just two people living in the same house anymore. They were husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. Over the following months, they worked hard to build their life together. Faith continued to learn about ranching, becoming increasingly skilled and confident. She took over management of the household finances and started a small vegetable garden that thrived under her care. She also began teaching reading and writing to some of the local children whose parents could not afford to send them to school in town, fulfilling her dream of being a teacher in her own way. Owen expanded the ranch, buying additional cattle and hiring a young hand to help with the workload. The extra help meant he and Faith had more time together, time they spent riding through the beautiful Arizona landscape, making plans for the future, and simply enjoying each other's company. They never heard from Charles Whitmore again. Rumor had it that he had left Arizona entirely, moving to California to avoid the scandal. Faith felt no guilt about his fate. He had tried to own her, and he had paid the price for that arrogance. Her parents were more complicated. Her father never responded to the telegram, maintaining his angry silence. But 6 months after the wedding, Faith received a letter from her mother. It was brief and carefully worded, clearly written when her father was out of the house, but it expressed her mother's relief that Faith was safe and her tentative hope that they might someday reconcile. Faith wrote back, a longer letter describing her life on the ranch and her happiness with Owen. She did not expect her father to forgive her, but she held out hope that she and her mother might slowly rebuild some kind of relationship. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. They had their struggles, as any couple does, learning to navigate each other's habits and moods. But they always talked through their problems, always chose honesty over resentment, always remembered why they had chosen each other. On their first anniversary, Owen surprised Faith with a trip to Phoenix. She was nervous about returning to the city where she had grown up, but Owen pointed out that she was a married woman now, legally protected and no longer under her father's control. They stayed at a nice hotel and went to dinner at a restaurant Faith had always loved. As they were leaving the restaurant, they ran into some of Faith's former friends. The women looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and envy, noting her sun-bronzed skin and the obvious happiness in her eyes. "Faith, we heard you had married and moved away," one of them said. "How are you? How is married life?" "It is wonderful," Faith said honestly, taking Owen's hand. "I am happier than I ever thought possible." "Really? But I heard you married a rancher." Is it not terribly difficult, living so far from civilization? Faith smiled. It is perfect. I have everything I need. She saw the confusion in their faces, the inability to understand how she could prefer ranch life to society parties and fancy dresses, but she did not need them to understand. She had chosen her own path, and that was enough. That night, as they lay in the hotel bed, Owen told her he had something important to discuss. "I have been thinking about the future," he said. "About expanding the ranch, maybe buying some of the land to the south. But I wanted to make sure you are happy with staying here, with making Arizona our permanent home. I know you once talked about California, about seeing the ocean." "I do not need to see the ocean," Faith said. "Home is wherever you are. If you want to expand the ranch, I am right there with you." "There is something else," Owen said, his voice taking on a nervous edge. "I have been thinking it might be time to start a family, if you want to, that is. I do not want to pressure you." Faith felt her heart swell with love for this man who always gave her a choice, who always cared about what she wanted. "I want that too," she said softly. "I want to have children with you, to raise them here on this land we have built together." Owen kissed her then, deep and passionate, and they made love with a new purpose, a new hope for the future they were creating together. It took several months, but eventually Faith realized she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening in early spring as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was overjoyed, picking her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was mostly easy, though the summer heat made Faith uncomfortable and tired. Owen was attentive and protective without being overbearing, making sure she did not work too hard while still respecting her need to feel useful. They spent the long summer evenings planning, choosing names and imagining what their child would be like. In late November of 1879, Faith went into labor. The local midwife came to help, a competent woman named Mrs. Henderson who had delivered half the babies in the territory. Owen stayed by Faith's side through the whole ordeal, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. When their son was finally born, healthy and screaming with impressive lungs, Faith felt a love unlike anything she had ever experienced before. This tiny person was theirs, created from their love and partnership. Owen held the baby with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of becoming a father. They named him Daniel Owen Rourke, after Faith's beloved brother and his father. Little Daniel had Owen's honey-colored eyes and Faith's dark hair, and from the start, he had a personality all his own. He was curious and energetic, always wanting to see and do everything. Being parents changed them in ways both challenging and wonderful. The sleepless nights were hard, and there were moments of frustration and exhaustion. But watching Daniel grow and develop, seeing him smile and laugh and learn, made every difficulty worthwhile. When Daniel was 2 years old, Faith became pregnant again. This time they were more prepared, more confident in their ability to handle whatever came. Their daughter Sarah was born in the spring of 1882, a calm and observant baby who seemed to study the world with serious eyes before breaking into sunny smiles. With 2 young children, the ranch work became more challenging, but they managed. Owen hired additional help, and Faith organized their days with military precision, balancing childcare with her other responsibilities. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. Over the years, they continued to build their life together. The ranch prospered, growing from the modest 100 acres Owen had started with to a significant operation that supplied beef to mining towns throughout the territory. Faith's teaching expanded too, until she had a dozen students coming to the ranch twice a week for lessons. They faced hardships, as everyone does. There were drought years when the cattle struggled, and there was a terrible fever that swept through the area when Daniel was 5, leaving them terrified until he finally recovered. There were arguments and disagreements, moments when the stress of life seemed overwhelming. But they always came back to each other, always remembered their commitment to face everything together. Faith's relationship with her mother slowly improved over the years. They exchanged letters regularly, and eventually, her mother even visited the ranch, marveling at how happy and healthy Faith looked. Her father never softened, never acknowledged Faith's marriage or his grandchildren, but Faith had made peace with that. She had learned that you cannot force someone to accept your choices, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is live your own truth, even without approval. On their 10th anniversary, Owen and Faith took a trip to California, just the two of them while Faith's mother watched the children. They finally saw the ocean that Faith had once dreamed of reaching, standing on the beach at San Francisco Bay and watching the waves roll in. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist. "Not running all the way here when you had the chance? You might have had a completely different life." Faith turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything she had never known she needed. His face was more weathered now, with lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the Arizona sun. His dark hair had a few threads of silver. But he was still the kindest, most genuine person she had ever known. "I do not regret a single thing," she said firmly. "You told me I could choose my own future, and I chose you. I chose us, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." "I love you," Owen said simply. "More now than even that first day when you pounded on my door in a torn wedding dress. I love you too. Forever." They stayed in California for a week, exploring the city and enjoying the freedom of being just a couple again without the demands of children and ranch. But by the end of the week, they were both eager to go home, to get back to the life they had built and the children they had created together. The train journey back to Arizona gave them time to talk about the future. Daniel was now almost 9, Sarah was 7, and they had recently learned that Faith was pregnant again. 3 children, Owen mused, shaking his head in wonder. "Our family just keeps growing." "Are you happy about it?" Faith asked. She knew he was, but she still liked to hear him say it. "I am ecstatic. Every day with you and our children is a gift. I never imagined I would have all this, a family and a thriving ranch and a wife who is not just beautiful but is also my best friend and partner." "I feel the same way. Sometimes I think about that girl who ran from her wedding, so scared and desperate, with no idea what would happen next. If I could go back and tell her everything would work out better than she ever dreamed, I do not think she would believe me." Their 3rd child, a boy they named Thomas after Owen's grandfather, was born in early 1883. He was an easy baby, content to observe the chaos of his older siblings with patient interest. With 3 children, their household was constantly full of noise and activity, but Faith thrived on it in a way that surprised her. She had always thought she wanted a quiet, intellectual life, but she discovered that her love for her family was louder than any silence could be. As the years passed, Faith and Owen became respected members of their community. Their ranch was known for its quality cattle and fair dealing, and Faith's informal school had grown into a recognized institution that provided education to dozens of local children. They were not wealthy in the way Faith's father had defined wealth, but they were rich in the things that mattered. Daniel grew into a thoughtful, responsible young man who loved the ranch and wanted to take it over someday. Sarah proved to be a gifted student with a talent for art, filling the house with sketches and paintings. Thomas was still young, but he showed signs of inheriting his father's mechanical aptitude and his mother's determination. In 1888, when Faith was 32 and Owen was 35, they received news that Gerald Zimmerman had died. Faith's initial reaction was complicated, a mixture of grief for the father he had once been and relief that his angry presence was no longer looming over her life. She traveled to Phoenix for the funeral, bringing Owen and their children with her. Her mother, now a widow, seemed smaller somehow, but also lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. She welcomed Faith with tears and open arms, and she embraced her grandchildren with joy. Over the following years, she would become a regular presence in their lives, spending months at a time living on the ranch and helping with the children. At the funeral, Faith saw Charles Whitmore from across the room. He was older now, grayer, with a hard look about him. He was alone, apparently never having married after the scandal of their broken engagement. When their eyes met, Faith did not look away or feel any of the fear she once would have felt. She simply nodded at him, an acknowledgement of their shared past, and then turned back to Owen and her children. That evening, as they prepared to leave Phoenix and return home, Faith's mother pulled her aside. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should have protected you from your father's plans. I should have been stronger." "You did the best you could in an impossible situation," Faith said gently. "And I turned out all right, did I not?" Her mother looked at Faith's sun-worn hands, her simple dress, her 3 healthy children, and her devoted husband. "You turned out better than all right. You turned out happy. That is all I ever wanted for you." They embraced, healing old wounds with their honesty and forgiveness. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes both large and small. Arizona became a state in 1912, and Faith and Owen celebrated by throwing a party at the ranch for all their neighbors. Daniel had indeed taken over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch by then, allowing Owen and Faith to focus on the parts of the work they most enjoyed. Sarah had become a teacher herself, running a proper school in Wickenburg. Thomas was studying engineering in Tucson, with plans to help modernize the ranch's water systems. Faith looked back on her life with deep satisfaction. She had started as a terrified woman fleeing an unwanted marriage, and she had become a wife, mother, teacher, and rancher. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a cowboy who had hidden her and told her she could choose her own future. And what a future she had chosen. On their 30th anniversary, Faith and Owen sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching the sun set over the land they had nurtured for 3 decades. Their children and grandchildren were inside, preparing a celebration dinner in their honor. Faith rested her head on Owen's shoulder, feeling the contentment that comes from a life well lived. "Do you remember the day we met?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist. "You in that ridiculous wedding dress, pounding on my door like the world was ending." "The world was ending," Faith said. "At least my old world was, and then you opened the door and a new world began." "I knew right then that you were going to change my life," Owen admitted. "I did not know how, but I knew it." "Best change ever," Faith said, tilting her face up to kiss him. After 30 years, his kiss still made her heart race. "Best change ever," Owen agreed. As they sat together watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, Faith thought about all the women who were still trapped as she had once been, forced into lives they had not chosen. She thought about the slow progress toward equality and justice, the suffragists who were fighting for women's right to vote and control their own destinies. She and Owen had done their part, raising their children to believe in equality and choice. Sarah was an independent woman with her own career. They had taught Daniel to respect women as equals and partners. Thomas had grown up seeing his mother as not just a caregiver, but as a capable rancher and businesswoman. "We did good, did not we?" Faith said softly. "We did great," Owen corrected. "We built something beautiful, something real. We chose each other and we kept choosing each other every single day." "Forever and always," Faith said. "Forever and always," Owen echoed. They sat together as the night deepened around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life based on love, respect, and choice. The ranch that Owen had started alone had become their shared legacy, a testament to what was possible when people were free to follow their hearts. Inside the house, their family was gathering, 3 generations of Rourkes ready to celebrate the love story that had started it all. Faith could hear her grandchildren laughing, could smell the food cooking, could feel Owen's steady presence beside her. This was what freedom looked like, she thought. Not just the absence of constraint, but the presence of love and choice and purpose. She had chosen Owen and he had chosen her, and together they had chosen to build something wonderful. As they finally rose to join their family inside, Owen took Faith's hand and kissed it gently, his honey-colored eyes warm with love. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For knocking on my door. For trusting me, for choosing to stay, for giving me this life." "Thank you for answering," Faith said, "for hiding me, for telling me I could choose my own future, for loving me exactly as I am." They walked into the house together, hand in hand as they had been for 30 years, ready to celebrate with the family they had created and the life they had chosen. The door closed behind them, shutting out the dark night and enclosing them in warmth and light and love. Their story had started with a desperate woman fleeing a forced marriage, and a kind cowboy who offered shelter without question. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined that first day. A love story that spanned decades and created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Faith Zimmerman Rourke had chosen her own future, and it had been more beautiful than anything she could have dreamed.